I'm Andy Brownell with James Rabe, and it is certainly a pleasure to have in our studios this morning Kim Norton, candidate for Rochester Mayor. I will mention that Charlie O'Connell will be on Friday for a very similar interview. Good morning, Kim, and thanks for navigating the minefield of construction in downtown Rochester to get here.
Yeah, good morning. It was a little bit of a travel, but I made it.
You made it through the maze. I guess this is an opportunity for our listeners. I know most people who have lived here for any length of time are very familiar with your name and face, being a member of the state legislature and the school board for many, many years. But for those who are unfamiliar with Kim Norton, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your decision to run for mayor of Rochester.
Sure. This has been very interesting now, filing for the mayoral office and realizing that young people don't know my history and that I really do need to explain it. So my family moved here in 1990, settled down. I got very involved in volunteer work, and my children were all put in the Rochester public school system, so I got involved in the schools and, eventually ran for the school board. But that was after I'd been attending school board meetings for a number of years. I'd been a very active parent in the PTA, and I'd run Jim Price for school board's campaign as his chair one year. So that was a really easy move into what one would consider politics.
Was that an eye opener for you though? That actually getting on that board?
It felt so comfortable. I had been going as area council. I've been area council PTA president for a number of years. And so I had been going to all, in fact, I probably had better attendance than some board meetings did. I'd been going to all the meetings for years. So actually that was an easy transition. It was nonpartisan. Probably the toughest part of that role was that when you're dealing with people's children, it's so personal. And so I would get lots of phone calls, spent hours and hours on the phone with parents. And, certainly issues like boundary changes are very difficult for the whole community, but particularly for parents and children. So being available to parents was something I learned to do, early on. And then it was accidental that I ran for the legislature. I was not ever really interested in politics. I didn't, at the time, I was kind of like, am I a Republican or Democrat? Well, I think I called both parties and, fell on the DFL side because of education issues, which is one of the primary reasons I was running for the legislature. So I'm not a partisan person. That actually was the bigger learning curve, how to be, a party politician. And so I guess I've always considered myself a moderate. I always ran on a moderate platform, common sense legislation, more about the people than the party. That's who I am and who I was and how I served. And then after 10 years, I knew I had done the things that I wanted to do when I went to the legislature, the things I'd had in my head, and of course found the initial goal was to get more funding for education. That was a lot harder.
A whole lot harder.
That was a whole lot harder than I thought. So, after 10 years, I'd had enough. I wanted to come back home. And so I retired. I was lucky enough to get a Bush Fellowship. So I spent the last 2 years traveling the world and the United States, going back and getting a master's degree. And all that learning was focused around sustainability, how to build a livable community and energy issues. So that's because I thought if I'm going to go back to school, complete a master's degree that I stopped, before I had my first child, never finished that, it was going to be something new and challenging, which, let me tell you, going back to school at a certain age is a challenge. Taking quantitative analysis is a challenge.
Does not sound like a fun time.
Daunting, to say the least.
It was fascinating. But so those 2 years away gave me time to rethink about what I wanted to do for this community. And I was going to use some of the information that I spent those 2 years learning and, all the rest of my leadership, skills to better the community. So I finally decided to run for mayor.
Okay, so Ardell Brady has been our mayor for many years. And as you're mentioning, young people, they might only know him as their mayor.
Yeah.
And knowing his style and knowing yourself, can you draw any comparisons on how, if you were elected mayor, how you might handle that job in comparison to Ardell?
So I think Ardell and I both have a great love for this community, and we've put a lot of our time and effort and lives into trying to make it better. So I would say we have that similarity. Ardell admittedly is not interested in policy to a great degree. I care more about policy. That's how I got into, when I was, a mom in the PTA, when I served in the school board and certainly the legislature. I know people, their eyes glaze over, but I'm a little bit of a policy wonk. So I see my leadership style as not only working collaboratively with the city council and with the administrative staff, which is super important, but working on policy rather than just focusing on the ambassador role. And that's very important, and I look forward to being able to do that, to speak on behalf of our community around the state, or certainly in the city when groups come to town, and internationally, which I've been able to do as a legislator, but now I can do it as the mayor of the great city of Rochester.
Any thought about whether the job should be a full-time job? I know that's come up. It seems like every time we elect a mayor. So it doesn't come up that often.
Well,
16 years ago, we had this
having been a
discussion.
part-time legislator,
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
It's a full-time job.
It is.
And when I finished graduate school, I thought, well, maybe I should come out and get a job. And I knew I wanted to run for mayor. And I thought, well, that's not fair to an employer. I'll just wait and see what happens with this role. I think it is full-time. The pay isn't full-time. And I understand that people don't like the concept of full-time politicians. But that really is just really a lack of ability to acknowledge the truth, which is legislators and the mayor work full time. I did put a call into Mayor Brady earlier and said, so tell me, what does your year look like? And he said his average is, I believe, 1,350 meetings, presentations, events a year. So it's a lot. It takes a lot of time, and I'm comfortable doing that. I'm willing to do that. It's something I want to do, so I'm ready.
Oh, as far as the issues facing the community, you've been out campaigning for months now, and you went through the primary. What are you hearing from the citizens? What do they want their mayor to address?
Oh, boy. I hear things like affordable housing almost everywhere I go. I've been spending the last month out in southeast Rochester, and that's definitely the top thing I hear at the door. Transportation and transit. People want reliable transportation to get downtown and back, or not just downtown. They want to be able to get to RCTC. The students want a direct route. Many, many different iterations of the issue of better transit and transportation. Those are probably the top two. Safety comes up periodically. People want their neighborhood safe. I think probably that was a little, raised up a little higher given the hiring of the new police chief. So people have been thinking about that. What kind of police chief did they want? And we have a new police chief now to introduce into our community. And I think from what I've heard, he's getting out there and been very responsive to the calls he's getting. And so safety is probably third. One of the issues, I have kind of my own platforms, and so I would say building stronger neighborhoods, and I think that does link directly to safety. If we have strong neighborhoods, people feel an affinity to the neighborhood, and they get to know each other, and they can keep those neighborhoods safer and know when something's amiss. Transparent government and having the city council run better. It's not been the smoothest running organization of late, despite a lot of efforts. So I think that's going to be a real challenge. And then having a diverse economy. We're going to be plenty busy with building, but we also need to diversify and we can't just have Mayo Clinic. We need other businesses. So those are a couple and then of course I mentioned the sustainability issue.
On the issue of affordable housing, how do we move in that direction? What are your ideas about moving into a direction where there are more housing opportunities for people of all levels?
Well, there are. I held a housing forum, and so I have quite a long list, which I'm not going to tick off because when I see people's eyes glaze over, that's when that starts happening. I'm going to put it up on the website. I went to put it up yesterday or the day before, and it needed some typos fixed before I posted it, but that will be up. I think we need to keep many options on the table. There are many, many things we can do. Modular homes, rehabbing older homes, zoning changes, inclusionary housing. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Denver, for instance, they build a plethora of luxury apartments and nobody can afford to live in them. And so this city is subsidizing affordable housing tenants in those until they can be sold. That's what they're doing. So there just are a ton of options out there. And like I said, I'm not going to name them all, but it is keeping them all things on the table and thinking of affordable housing differently. I think we think of it only in terms of maybe a young person working, new family working a lower wage job. But for many middle income families, particularly those that are their children are moving off away. They have empty bedrooms. They'd love to turn that house over to a young family with kids. They can't afford to get out of that house, even though they may be middle income. There's no affordable housing within their price range after they sell the home that they're currently living in. And so I think we have to think of affordable and workforce housing in a more broad way than, maybe initially comes to mind.
And you mentioned transportation, and I go to public transit, I guess, when we're thinking of that, and we're kind of at a crossroads in Rochester regarding that. We have an opportunity with DMC to make a big move, but at this point it doesn't appear that the citizens have a clear idea of what that's going to be.
And it's been a moving target, I will say that.
Okay, so what's your vision or ideas concerning public transit for the community?
Well, initially, just regard to the DMC up at the Capitol, it was the vision that was sort of implanted in my head during the whole discussion process was about infrastructure and having transit and transportation, and we would have a city loop that might be a tram, or that there would be more of a electric tram type system that would be put in place, and that started out in all the initial public forums that I was going to. It's nowhere to be found anymore. I'm very frustrated about that. To me, the St. Mary's route from downtown to St. Mary's is absolutely a common sense tram route. It goes every day, constantly, and it's not just for Mayo Clinic staff. It's also employees that work there and people in the community. If we put a parking ramp out there, they could park and come into downtown. So that's just one example. I had expected more of a they talk about hub and spoke type transit system that would include some rail, would include certainly, now they've moved it all to bus rapid transit, which I think gets confused in the dialogue a little bit. But we do need a better bus system. We need it to run more often. We need it to be consistent and run more hours, longer hours for people who at a hospital, obviously.
Well, there are folks that work overnight. I know many people that would love to have a midnight bus so they can get back to their car.
Well, it's even past that. If you work late.
Late, period, right.
You're held at the office late in your downtime. You can get stuck.
Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't want to have that option available? And I think the city is trying to balance with how can we make it affordable if we make it available, and it's which came first, the chicken or the egg. If we put it out there and spend a lot of money, nobody rides it, we could be hurting. So we're reticent to do that. But at some point, we're going to have to try some of these things. I have heard that there's a potential trial of 2nd Street. They're not obviously going to put a tram in, so I think they're going to put a bus in, and then my guess is they'll try to say, see, since the bus is working so well, we don't need a tram. But I think they are going to try something. But in talking to some of the business owners along 2nd Street, I know they counted some cars and they were looking at the traffic patterns, and they said, do you know how many buses come every single day? And it's not just city buses, right. It's city buses and Mayo buses.
And the local hotels have their shuttle buses running.
Absolutely. So if you could get all those buses off 2nd Street, it would make the traffic that comes through there flow much easier. So
you talked about business people. I know that a lot of business people are worried that any of this new stuff will cost them a lot in taxes, and they feel heavily burdened by taxes already. How do we address that?
Well, as Rochester grows, our tax base grows. And so part of it is smart budgeting and setting priorities as the tax base with the people that are going to be moving in to Rochester, given the growth, at least that's the promise, that broadens the tax base, which means the government has more money to spend. And if you don't spend it, the taxes broaden out among more people. So we have a natural system in place. We just have to be careful that we can manage it. And, I do think we have to recall, we are growing. There will be people that need services. Transit and transportation are one of them. If we can't provide parking for everyone, we have to provide transit for everyone. And frankly, I think it will be both.
Right.
One of the topics that's moved closer to the forefront over the last, I'd say, 5 years or so in the community, especially for the long-timers like myself, is in this time of rapid change and historic preservation.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you stand on what the community should be doing to save some of those old treasures that maybe there's not a use for them right now, but down the road there could be. It's a tough issue. But where are you at, Mike?
Well, my old treasure that I've been trying to save right now with my own personal effort is the Peace Fountain. So I think that is part of our history. And I do think, I personally would like to see a historic district. I think we have a natural one downtown. I think we just need to kind of cordon it off and say this is where it is. And I also appreciate the efforts of folks in town to identify other buildings that are worth preserving and worth that historic preservation designation. But I think we need to be very careful there. Just because something is old doesn't mean everything is worth saving. Certainly many things are. So I think that's been a debate I've watched at the city council, attending those meetings this past year, where there have been some pretty controversial building structures brought forward, and what does the owner want, and what do citizens want, and
Sure.
The difference between what the city council expected of the historic preservation committee and what they brought forward. So it's very controversial, but I do think we need to preserve our history in this community, and it's not going to be everything, and a district will make it. That'll help.
Okay.
I think
There are people that try to make this a partisan job. How do you address folks that say or ask questions that are obviously very partisan, like where do you stand on gun control? Where do you stand on A, B, C, or D, and expect you to be partisan or Charlie to be partisan?
Well, I can say, as I mentioned kind of at the front of the program, that I've never been a super partisan person. I certainly have my leanings, and I'm not going to run from my history. I'm very proud of the service I did in the legislature, and I'm proud, of serving with the DFL or Democratic Party during that time. I differed from them periodically, and that's okay too. The mayor's position is nonpartisan. Our city made that choice, which is why I stepped away. I spent 2 years. I've done nothing with the party. And frankly, that's been to some people's dismay. Where are you? Why have you walked away? It's because I'm committed to a nonpartisan mayorship. So I stayed away. I've tried to be nonpartisan in everything I talk about. And there certainly are people that are trying to force that issue. And I think both Charlie and I have committed to running this as a nonpartisan position. I will say, some people like to use the term politician in a negative way. I've always seen myself as a public servant, and yes, I've done political activity and can be viewed as a politician, but it's public service first. My community's always been first, and I hope people realize that that's just rhetoric and not who I am.
All right, we're going to run out of time, but I wanted to give you a chance. If there's something that we haven't talked about, but you'd like to extend that message to the voters about why they should vote for Kim Norton for mayor, I'll give you the stand, I guess, for the last few minutes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time here. I'm dedicated to this community. I love it. I have demonstrated my dedication to the community in a number of ways over the year, from volunteer to nonpartisan to partisan, and I hope nonpartisan again. And that I want to represent the people of the community's views. That's what I tried doing on the school board. It's what I tried doing in the legislature. I think I can do that as mayor. I feel a great sense of responsibility, having worked on the DMCA legislation. I worked really hard to make sure that the city was in charge of every decision that was made. Ultimately, as mayor, I would serve on the DMCC board and would continue to make certain that what happens with the downtown, as well as the whole city's development, is in the best interest of the community and the people who live here, because that's really what matters. So that was my motivation. I truly hope I have the opportunity to do it, and I appreciate your time here.
Do you have a website if somebody wanted to visit it to find out more?
Yep, kimnorton.org has a little bit of information, and as I said, that housing forum will be posted, and I also have some energy related, because that's an interest of mine, that'll be posted there soon as well.
All right, Kim Norton, candidate for Rochester mayor. Thanks for coming in.
Absolutely, thank you.